On today's episode of Dr. Momcast, we talk about flashy and misleading headlines about science that grab our attention. As a consumer of scientific research in the media, how do you know what is true and what is clickbait? Marla hits us up with a pop culture reference, which we didn't know she had in her, and we learn that Summer's college mascot was the mule, or jackasses. How does that relate to our discussion of the media portrayal of scientific research? You'll have to listen to find out. We are real moms talking about real science in real life.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Dr. Momcast. I am Dr. Marla Shapiro here with most of my favorite sports neuropsychology colleagues.
Dr. Alyssa Wickland,
Dr. Beth Pura,
Dr. Lisa Nippolt-Baca,
Dr. Summer Ott.
And we are here to talk about kids, health, sports, safety, anything else that comes up along the way. It's a shame Sonia's not here because she talked about educating our listeners on being informed consumers. This acknowledgement that the flashy headlines could sometimes be misleading, and how do we take that and help people distill what's meaningful, what's right, what's wrong, how to be savvy research consumers. Alyssa, I think this conversational tangent started with you seeing the news flash that took on a life of its own. And that really resonated with you.
Yeah, Marla, all too often we see headlines in the media reporting on scientific studies. Often the headline does not match the study results. The headline is flashy. But when it's discordant from the research findings, it can perpetuate the cycle of misinformation about scientific studies. And as we are all concussion specialists, we see this a lot in the world of concussion research. And we talked a little bit about some of the misinformation last week when looking at protective helmet covers and other equipment. To be clear, I don't want to make this just about concussion. This is in general about how media headlines can skew the actual scientific data. So if you're a golf parent out there and concussion is not in your youth's world, don't stop listening, because I do think that this is important for parents who have youth athletes who are wondering, how can I be a more informed consumer about these different studies? We've become such a headline-laden society of scrolling and just reading the headlines. And that's why I love our format of this podcast, is trying to not only help people be informed consumers, but also to do the deeper dive for some of these topics, because it's almost impossible to do the deep dive on all of these things. I want to share a specific study headline that was in the news this week and then tell you the actual results of the study. Spoiler alert, they don't match. But also, let's talk about how to find resources that are more fact-based when we are consuming this information that the media is putting out.
There was a study probably about 9 months ago that looked at consumption of media of a single study versus review studies. So a review study is when they look at all of the studies on a particular topic, and they eliminate the ones that are poorly done, and then they analyze or review, and they come up with a better picture of what the subject of interest is. So any one study can find something, but a review study is a much better way of understanding the science. And what they found is the media is very good at picking up a salacious one research study that may in fact be terrible. It may be poorly done, but when a meta-analytical review comes out, it's never mentioned. And that's better science. It's not sexy.
I was just going to add to Beth's point too about how that one particular article continues to get so much attention. Even professionals may be guilty at retweeting an article and not necessarily reading it. I'm guilty and don't read the whole thing. And then later, the title didn't reflect the study at all, and it was misinformation. When you may retweet something, did you really read it to see if it's accurate?
Are you saying it's possible Elvis is still not among us?
I can still hope. Although, wouldn't he be like 113 or something by now?
He is immortal. He's a king, right?
No, sorry, Marla. Elvis has left the building. Okay, I want to tell you about the study that got my panties in a bunch because the headlines did not match the results. Some of the headlines included scientists find traumatic brain injury and dementia link. Concussion early in life causes cognitive decline. And I kept seeing these headlines over and over referencing this one study. When you look at the actual study findings, this is white men in the 1950s, which how far we have come. They actually recruited only Caucasian men that were twins who were World War II veterans. And the question was, if one twin has had a concussion, is that twin more likely later in life to have cognitive impairment relative to their twin never had a concussion? The results of the study showed that The older the man was when they had their concussion, meaning if they were over the age of 25, there was an increased rate of cognitive decline at the age of 70.
But I'm going to use the word decline in air quotes because it was a very tiny difference.
That was really discordant to a lot of the headlines I was seeing. I'm curious what your thoughts are when you see those headlines. Traumatic brain injury and dementia link. Concussion early in life causes cognitive decline. Because everybody can interpret them differently. To me, read more as when I see brain injury early in life, I'm thinking, oh, they're saying that either youth sport-related concussion or younger individuals.
I did think about, is this a child? The public would definitely maybe assume the same.
But we're talking about what somebody's marketing department or news outlet took from this and cherry picked to sensationalize.
One thing, Alyssa, back to your question of what are our thoughts on it or what did we notice? At the risk of getting into the weeds, I'll put my ghillie suit on and dive in. But the thing that
What's a
struck me
ghillie
most,
suit?
You'll put on your what?
Your
Your
they
ghillie
call it
suit.
a ghillie suit, like the hunter thing.
Like your frog giggers?
Yeah, duck hunters wear them.
Honey, I'm a Jew from the Southeast. I don't know duck hunting.
In Chicago, I know what a ghillie suit is.
Am I using it wrong?
I don't know. The thing that struck me most, Alyssa, and just from those headlines that you read, the word traumatic brain injury was used, the word concussion was used. So when I was even reading the actual article, I'm like, wait, how are they defining this? Comparing people with severe traumatic brain injury who have been in comas or have brain bleeds is comparing apples to oranges to this population with concussions.
And that's such a great point because we know that the technical diagnostic term for concussion is a mild traumatic brain injury, a TBI, but it's a software problem, not a hardware problem.
So I think you all are proving my point that we can take parts of these headlines and we can overlay information we may have or other things we have heard, but are we ever getting to the conclusion or what actually was found in the study? When I read you those headlines, several of you felt earlier in life, including myself, earlier in life, we must be talking about youth athletes here, right?
Right.
No, earlier in life is over the age of 25. When you're 70, 25 is earlier in life, right? But you see how that was open to interpretation, and that's where the media doesn't necessarily clarify.
Preach.
The results of the study showed that the older the man was when they had their concussion, over the age of 25, there was an increased rate of cognitive decline at the age of 70.
How are they measuring cognitive decline, Alyssa?
Cognitive decline was measured by a telephone interview. This is a valid method to assess thinking abilities in epidemiologic large-scale studies. It would be cost prohibitive to have every one of these individuals come into a clinic and do testing. So there are ways, not ideal, obviously, but there are ways to do some assessment of cognition over the telephone. What they found was that the cognitive decline was significant in one twin who had a history of concussion versus the twin who had not. The scale of the tool they used is 0 to 50. So 50 points would be a perfect score on this tool. The cognitive decline difference was 0.05. In 10 years, a 0.05 decline on a test that they gave these individuals would result in a total of a half point in decline on this measure that goes from 0 to a score of 50. So in 10 years, the twin who had a concussion versus the twin that didn't, the one with the concussion would score, in hypothetically, if all things are equal, would score a 39, and the twin with no concussion would score a 39.5, higher being better. The question I had, is that clinically significant?
Like, does it make a big difference in the grand scheme of life? Like,
What does it mean in the real world?
What does it mean in the real world? Did anybody hear any of this from this headline? The
No.
headline
No.
is concussion early in life causes cognitive decline decades later. That's the Newsweek headline. I'm going to defend the author of the study because they do appropriately discuss the limitations of the study, that they're asking these men to remember something that happened a long time ago. They're assessing cognition over the phone, that we don't know if there's clinical significance to this small difference in number of points. But that certainly is not what the marketing department / media headline snippet picks up. And obviously a headline is just that. It's a snippet. But when the snippet is misleading and you don't read the whole story or the whole study, it certainly can lead you to believe misinformation.
Can I just explain something you said to the
Yeah.
listener? You talked about limitations. Is in any study, it's required that the authors also list limitations to their study, be it it's all white men, it's a limited number, or there's a myriad of things.
That's a great point, Beth.
I was watching the Today Show some months ago now, but there was a study about the link between artificial sweeteners and cancer. And the headline was, artificial sweeteners cause cancer, stop drinking your diet soda.
Well, I'm fucked.
Beth,
I've got my Coke Zero right here in my hand. Coke, call us if you would like to sponsor us. But the woman who brought up, she said, wait, based on the numbers, you would have to drink 100 cans of diet soda per day to have the clinical effect that actually would make you more likely to get cancer. And even then, the percentage wasn't that high. So really, on a day-to-day basis, I clearly did not give up my Coke Zero, right? Because I'm not that concerned about it. I don't drink 100 a day, but
perfect example.
And exactly
Lisa.
what you're talking about, Alyssa. Okay, so am I going to panic because I had a concussion and mine was after 25, and now because I'm going to fall apart cognitively, or is one fraction of a point on a test going to change my daily functioning at all?
The fear that creates and the anxiety in a world where people are already so prone to mental health challenges and stress. And then you read that and it's, oh my gosh, this is one more thing I have to worry about for my kid if he's playing sports or if I'm drinking too many Dr. Peppers in Texas. But it's frustrating.
I thought everything was Coke in Texas.
It's Dr. Pepper.
It's Dr. Pepper.
Really?
Really?
Yeah, it's huge here.
I thought everything was Coke.
Growing up, we said, do you want a pop in the Midwest? Yeah. But no, Dr. Pepper is the thing here.
We say pop. I actually purposely said soda, so I was using my non-regional diction.
Oh, impressive.
Thank you. I said soda.
Soda.
But I
Minnesota.
but I said soda.
Interesting. So it's a matter of trying to teach people to say, maybe I need to look beyond the headlines and give you some tools to critically review this before you spend any of your energy worrying about something that might not be scientifically valid. And also not to make too much of one study. One study is just one study. It may be duplicated. It may not be. You don't know. And so if you ever hear something, it should be, that's interesting. If it's relevant to me, I can certainly ask my healthcare provider, or I can try to do some of the research, but really file it away and wait for some corroborating data, really, which is what we do. We don't run around like our hair's on fire over one study. We just say, okay, it's a good starting point.
Yeah, that's a great tip, Beth. Don't run around like your hair is on fire.
One of the things that when I heard you talk about this study, Alyssa, is that many times people think an association or relationship, a correlation is causation.
Are any of you fans of the movie Spaceballs?
Yes.
Oh, thank God.
John
Anyone?
Candy.
Yeah.
Just don't ask me, okay?
Oh, except for Mark. In Spaceballs, they go ludicrous speed. Okay. There's one study that will always stand out to me where I feel like we're just going to take this spaceship right onto ludicrous speed. So there was an interesting study.
You talking about the rapper?
No.
Oh my God. But
You know Luda?
Marla out of left field who knows no celebrity names whatsoever.
Oh my God. I am blown away, Marla.
I got to keep you on your toes, man.
You really
Impressive.
do.
You never cease to amaze us.
But-
Yeah. Okay, major tangent, but I swear it's related to what Summer said about correlation and causation and the relationship between scientific findings. So a few years ago, there was a study that took me on a ride at ludicrous speed. In 2017, a research group used epidemiologic data, so large number of people in their data set. And this is the question they asked. Does the team logo and the mascot of your university predict concussion? And it arose because at the time, there were a lot of studies saying that potentially playing at higher altitude as opposed to sea level was protective against concussion. So the point they were making is that these could be coincidental findings of large-scale studies. So they took it to ludicrous mode. And although they don't describe it that way, I think that they were doing a solid for science. They used statistics to see if there was an association between altitude and concussion risk. And then they took those same statistics and looked at animate versus inanimate mascots. And what they found was that teams with animal logos had a reduction in the risk of concussion across 4 seasons, similar to the altitude data. That you can adjust your altitude, or you could just, instead of being the sabers, you could be the saber-toothed tigers, and you would be more protected against concussion.
This
I
is
love
awesome.
it. It's such a great example, Alyssa. It's such a great example.
The takeaway from that study is that there's weak scientific rationale, and this is what Summer was pointing out, can show coincidental rather than causal findings. If the study's large enough, if the statistics are fancy enough, you can show associations where there's no meaningful difference. I hope it goes without saying that because your university's mascot is an animal versus not, that really is ridiculous, that there's no difference in your injury rate on any injuries. When I think back to the study, the media coverage of this twin study, the question remains, is a half point over 10-year difference.
So now I'm going to have to research the concussion rate of my alma mater. They were the mules, the jackasses, and see what their concussion rate was. As a jackass, are you prone to more concussion?
As a general rule, if you're a jackass, you're more prone to concussions.
So University of Central Missouri, how many concussions are the jackasses having?
What? You know what Jackass the movie is? Do you know that?
I've heard of it, yeah.
Okay.
But
It does sound like different.
segueing away from the fact that I am clueless about pop culture.
And I'm sure that the media coverage of that study was, if your school has an animal as a mascot, you have a lower rate of concussion. So this brings up 2 points. Number one, that headline obviously is accurate about the mascot study, but you need to read the story to really understand that it was more about the statistics than it was about the mascot. And in the mascot study and in the twin study, the headline is to grab your attention. It's not to summarize the actual findings of the study or to discuss the clinical significance. You have to read the study or the story to grasp those details. And typically, the author doesn't have any say on how the media captures the spirit of the research.
I can speak from experience with that. You don't always get to review. Maybe if it's internally done by your own marketing and media people and they write articles on your research, they'll allow you to review it beforehand. But if it's an outside reporter from like a news station or anything like that, they won't always allow you to review it. Their quote might be accurate, but how they spin it,
But it's how the media spins it, it wasn't the author spinning.
There's so many times, there's an absolute disconnect with what the title, again, the clickbait is, and then the substance of the actual article or study.
That's such a great
sometimes
point.
you just have to separate them. I've written op-ed pieces and you send them off with one title and they get published with another title. So there is a lack of control. It's incredibly frustrating for the author to have their science misrepresented, because that's the other thing I really want to talk about is we're talking about how science works and the little incremental information that we get from any individual study that moves us in the right direction. So we want these studies and we want to continue them to have the conversation. We just want the public to have resources to think critically. As Alyssa said, it's part of our goal. One of our reasons we did this podcast in the first place is just to have this conversation, to say, here's another way of looking at what you're hearing in the news.
Beth, a few points of what you said that I think are great to underscore is that even if it's a little thing that may not make a lot of difference in the real world, it's moving the needle on the science and it's setting the stage for more studies, which is a really important point. And it's what is taken from that to get people to sit up and notice. And a lot of that is lost in these flashy headlines.
That's a great point. And actually, I think I have another study that really illustrates this point perfectly. There was another headline I saw recently. The headline was, U.S. surgeons are committing suicide at an alarming rate. This was in The Guardian. The article cites that between 2003 and 2017, which is a span of 14 years, if I did the math correctly, 71 surgeons died by suicide. Let me be very clear. One suicide is too many. In no way to minimize that there are surgeons who are struggling and dying by suicide. The point is that if you look in a 14-year span and you do the math, 71 surgeons over 14 years is an average of 5 surgeons per year. Again, the headline is U.S. surgeons committing suicide at an alarming
rate. But again, we're talking about 71 people over a 14-year period. I'm thinking, what is the annual rate of individuals dying by suicide in the United States? It's around 48,000 per the CDC. Okay. So in 2021, 48,000 people died by suicide. So 5 surgeons a year divided by the 48,000 people across the United States who die by suicide is 0.0001% are surgeons. If you do the rough math, this is one way to look at these studies, to actually do the math and see what is the number telling. I can't emphasize enough, one suicide is too many, but the headline is saying at an alarming rate, and I think that's misleading. But to your point, Marla and Beth, by the end of the article, they talk about the good that has come from the awareness of this. Over the past 15 or 20 years, there's been a reduction in the number of hours that surgeons can work during their residency, because that was leading to stress and mental health concerns. There's increased mental health resources for surgeons. So while the headline is alarming, the statistics don't necessarily match. The point is there can be some good in moving the needle, as you guys were describing. I don't think it excuses the alarming headline necessarily. But again, that's one way to break down these types of articles, going from the alarming headline to the data, to thinking critically, to seeing what's the positive potential outcome.
And you're a mom of a surgeon, or you're a mom of a kid who wants to go into surgery, and you see that headline. And so now you've freaked out a whole bunch of loved ones because you think there's a significant increase in the rates of suicide in this particular population. That's troubling.
Yeah.
And the headlines become almost like a bad game of telephone. Like the twin study we were talking about says, okay, TBI in early life creates cognitive decline later in life. Well, then is somebody going to read that as our kids are dying early because they're getting concussions? No, we're not even talking about kids in the study. Once the ball gets rolling, it gets really hard to stop it, and it catches steam in the media, and
hard to put the genie back in the bottle.
And we had that experience in our clinics all the time. I had a lovely gentleman recently who had a concussion, a very normal recovery, no symptoms at all, but came in saying, but what about the study that I just heard about that with Alyssa's talking about? When I explained to him what the study said, and then he said, but what about this? And we had several iterations of different studies that he was talking about. To exactly Lisa's point is that there starts being in this bias toward being aware of studies that are of concern to you. And we also know that there's a negativity bias, not only in research publications, but also in media.
But your example, Beth, about the patient coming in and talking about what they read with you and you being able to articulate and describe it, help him to think critically, motivates me. That's the type of doctor I want to go see, who is aware of the literature, but might even further motivate, if you can, to seek out a specialist for certain situations.
Can you talk more about that negativity bias? I think that's a really interesting point.
It's just human nature, is that we tend to have a bias toward the negative thing.
What Beth was talking about, how you start to focus on what you want to see, the confirmation bias in a way. The social media algorithms are very sophisticated that if you click on one article, guess what's going to show up on your feed? Every single article that supports and is aligned with the one that you just read. So it's going to start to feel like, oh, now it's not just this one story, it's lots of stories. And it just gets overwhelming.
Yeah, I accidentally clicked once a recent article about a couple of Kardashians being a fight. I didn't care. And now on my feed's all Kardashian. I'm so annoyed by it.
It's the negative bias that some of us are more optimists, some of us are more pessimists, but we're hardwired to tend to remember, pay more attention to the negative stuff. Some of us more than others. You have an up and down day, you go home, how's your day? In general, humans are more likely to remember the negative stuff. That's why trauma can really rock our souls. And same thing with headlines and news. We tend to notice the negative stuff. It's what people grab onto.
There's actually research looking at why. And it's because it literally goes back to survival.
Yeah.
If you had to pay attention to things that were of danger to you. Now we're not going to be eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, but our feelings are going to be hurt because we don't get enough likes on Twitter or Instagram.
Exactly.
Our brains are being rewired to think different things are dangerous. is both our biology and the algorithms of news media is feeding into that negative bias and that confirmatory bias. And I really think a lot of this is just about that education. It's about walking people through their fears about what they're hearing, what they understand. We talked about this before. Listener brought this up very adeptly last week, is that we also are coming from a place of privilege, that we have access to specialists and we have availability. We want to understand that that's just not true for everyone. And we want to be cognizant of that. So the internet, unfortunately, is a resource for a lot of people who don't have access to specialists.
In addition to negativity bias, there's also interesting research on how our brain integrates misinformation. It's not as if you read a headline that's wrong, then you find the corrective information and it pushes the headline out of memory. Instead, your brain tries to integrate that information. And so it is like a bad game of telephone where you may have some of the story, your brain's integrated it with misinformation, and out pops misunderstanding. The other thing is if you see things over and over, or you hear things over and over, you're more likely to assume that they're true. This is what's so effective about algorithms on our search engines, but also so dangerous.
So how do you even disentangle? Is it that the internet's just telling me this and now I see these reproducible headlines, or is this a legitimate headline? I wish we had a solid answer for that. I don't think we do, other than some of the things we've talked about.
What about if you read a topic or you read a headline and you don't have access, if you do have the capability of an internet, seeking out a medical center, reputable places like Mayo, in that search engine, search that topic. It may not be the exact recent headline or recent research, but would give them a foundation.
I think that's a point, especially the last few years. What our primary care physicians and our emergency room docs, all that they've had to know about so many things. There is no way they can know as much as any one specialist. Part of that is we're saying to people, go find information, go seek this out. But wait, don't read everything because it might be sensationalized. And so finding that happy medium. Summer, I think your point about looking for recognized, reputable medical institutions, particularly in more urban areas that might have more dollars and resources. The ones that have strong research programs, I think, are more likely to have more cutting edge or up-to-date info. What are other ways that people can start to sift through this?
If you really want to get into the weeds on the scientific part, and perhaps maybe learn how to read some of these scientific articles, if you are not a scientist or haven't done this before, Peter Attia, who does a podcast called The Drive, it's episode 269 on good versus bad science, how to read and understand scientific studies in the lay population.
There's also something called the evidence pyramid, and you can find a visual of it online. But basically, it's the shape of a pyramid where the top of the pyramid represents the strongest evidence we find in science, and the bottom of the pyramid is the unfiltered evidence.
The tip of the pyramid, the very top, are those review articles that Beth was talking about earlier. It's a combination of a lot of articles finding the best methodology. And as the pyramid widens and you get down to the very bottom, that's more opinion and conjecture and maybe theorizing or hypothesizing. And those things are all okay to do. I almost read the media headlines at that level of opinion, honestly. There may be some facts in here, but I'm not going to put too much into it until I see on mayo.org or some reputable site that this is a more factually based finding in whatever topic it is. So I think one way is to be a skeptic, but in a positive way.
So Alyssa, you keep referencing research methodology. Tell us a little bit about what you mean by that so folks have this context for interpreting the research we're talking about.
Great question, Marla. The methods in which the study is undertaken. So the type of people that are involved in the study, the type of statistical analysis that's used, where it's published, how the data is collected. So a lot goes into the method. It's looking at the ingredients in the recipe that is the study.
I think the recipe is a great analogy. And that's the kind of stuff that we look at or reviewers look at when they're looking at these research studies. What is the methodology?
Yeah.
We have really gone into the weeds tonight, talking about nitty gritty of research and how to read, how to review. But there's just clearly some takeaways. The bottom line is being a savvy consumer of research. looking for reputable sources, sites to help tease apart, go to experts, go to recognized medical institutions, but be a little cynical too. There's so much in the world out there that is highlighted and flashy. Just caveat emptor, buyer beware.
Read the article.
Read the article.
Or just understand that the headline may not actually, that's the whole story.
Bottom line too, we know that headlines sell, newspapers, magazines, clickbait, what have you. But to us, I think a takeaway is that headlines are the starting point and not the ending point. If it grabs your attention, if it's something that's important, try to look under the hood a little bit. See if there's articles to cite. See if you can find corroborating evidence. Yes, pay attention because these are great conversation starters, but use it as the starting point, not the ending point. It's a play, not the touchdown.
Grab your ghillie suit and jump in the weeds.
Yeah. So, Alyssa, I hope that your panties have ironed themselves out.
Yes, Marla, my panties are no longer in a wad. They have ironed themselves out. I got so riled up about these particular headlines because they were so discordant to the research findings. So I hope this sheds some light on how to get past that starting point of the headline and to
Tune in next time for whatever riles us up.
Whatever butters your biscuit.
Something else is going to rile us up. Don't worry, to our listeners.
Oh,
God. Yes. These podcasts are cathartic for us, aren't they?